Hello and welcome to Hosting HR. I'm Leon Morley, founder of HR Recruitment Solutions and host of this very podcast as well. In this show, we're going to be discussing age and age in the workforce. And to set the scene somewhat, no time really in human history have we had such a broad age range in the workforce. And that brings with it some great opportunities, but also some challenges for businesses and organizations. And of course, the HR profession as well. So we're going to be discussing all those things with our wonderful panel. We are currently live across LinkedIn, Facebook, YouTube, and also on Twitter. And it'd be great to hear your thoughts. And if you've got any questions for our panelists, they're certainly open to hearing those. So feel free in the chat function to pop those in there. Certainly would be good. And also feel free to subscribe if you're listening to this on a podcast or if you're on YouTube. There's lots of other content on those platforms. So hopefully you'll enjoy those too. Let's introduce to our panel, I suppose. So, Michael, we first discussed this topic, so it makes sense that we start with you. Would you like to introduce yourself to our audience?
Thank you. Michael Easton, founder of Dragonfly People Limited, and also a career spanning many different sectors and large organizations down to founder organizations. And I've been helping companies create a brilliant employee experience and award-winning employee experience across these organizations. What I'm passionate about is giving people the opportunity to grow and develop as the company and organizations grow and develop together.
Excellent. We're very happy to have you here, particularly because people won't know, but in the green room, we had a few technical difficulties. So the moment we thought you weren't going to make it last minute. So yeah, great to have you here. Let's go to Lucy. Would you like to introduce yourself next?
Yeah, hi, good to meet everyone. Just to reassure you, my voice doesn't normally sound like this. I'm slightly getting over a cold. My background is I'm a chartered psychologist. I absolutely love psychology. And what I do more specifically at the moment is help people as they get older figure out what job it is they want to do next.
Fantastic. Lisa?
Yes, hi, and thanks everybody for joining us today. I'm sure that you'd rather be watching Everdale Farm. I'm told it starts at 7:30. If we're boring you can all switch off. So I've always worked in HR my entire career, and love being part of a business where you can provide and grow and develop, and provide a great environment for people to thrive in. And what I want in the world is for everybody to love what they do the way that I love what I do.
Fantastic, fantastic. So for those of you that watch our show regularly, you'll know what is coming next, and it is something
time
called...
for 2 lies, 1 truth.
That's right. So we've obviously got to know their sort of professional introductions, but we always like to know a little bit more about each of our panelists. So for those of you that don't know what 2 lies, 1 truth is, it's really simple. Each of our panelists will tell us 3 facts about themselves, 2 of which are lies, and 1 is in fact a truth. And at the end of the show, we'll go around and we'll try and figure out which the truth is. I've had a very good record in the last few shows. I think we're on to about show 18 or 19 now. So I've figured out a lot of people, I think, and I think I'm getting pretty wise on these sorts of things. But certainly, stay around to the end of the show and we'll try and find out which of those is the truth. So we'll go in the same order, makes sense. So Michael, would you like to tell us your 3 truths?
I'm a very bad skier.
Okay.
I play bagpipes, world champion bagpipe player. And thirdly...
World champion. Just threw that in there again. Okay, world champion bagpipe. Okay, yeah.
And thirdly, I can hop very well.
Okay. What does hopping very well mean? I don't even know what
It means you can stay hopping for a long time.
Oh, I see. Okay. Interesting.
Yeah.
Bizarre ones. I think they're all lies, to be honest with you. Lucy, what are your 3 facts?
I love reptiles. So I have a python as a pet. I have I get a rival, Michael's bagpipes. I have a Guinness World Record, and I grew up and spent 22 years in Kenya.
Oh, interesting.
Although when I was growing up there, people tended to call it Kenya.
Yeah. My Grampy, let's call him. He went to Kenya for quite a long time. Every time he says it, I was like, isn't it Kenya? He says it all the time. Anyway, I think it was a very informative time for him, and he certainly, really liked his time there. Lisa?
Yes, I speak 3 languages.
Okay.
I used to be a vet.
Oh, okay.
And I live in an eco house.
Oh, okay. Interesting.
Interesting.
I think I know which one that is. But yeah, that's the other thing as well. I say that I'm good at working it out, but the reality is I know panelists, and I've had several conversations obviously before they come on the show. I might know them a long time. Obviously Lisa and I have met, so you get an idea about what somebody is about.
That's cheating, Leon.
I think it might be called cheating, yeah, but I like to think that it's just I'm very good at this particular game. But there we go. So certainly if you're listening in, stay tuned at the end and we'll find out which of those is actually a truth and which of those are in fact lies. I'm pretty sure the world champion bagpipe is a lie because you added that at the end, but we'll see. I might be wrong. I may well be wrong. Anyway, let's get on with the discussion. So obviously we're talking about age today. And before we discuss some of the challenges that potentially we're going to have some top tips for people to take away, I thought it'd be really interesting to start with some of the opportunities. So we're talking about a generation workforce, which has, if you like the groupings, and we're going to use those a little bit through the show, but we'll talk about that, whether they're a good thing or not. But we basically have around about 4 generational groups. So the baby boomers, Generation X, Generation Y, and Generation Z going into the workforce. I just really wanted to understand, Michael, what opportunities that age diversity offers an organization, if we can start on a positive light.
Well, I think it's a wonderful opportunity for people to share experience. And we talk about bringing your whole self to work in an organization, but actually the ability to reach out and create communities within organizations to share perspectives from each individual's backgrounds and individual circumstances of why they're there, and creates the momentum to be able to solve organizational issues, deal with customer issues, and support a more holistic view of why we're here as an organization. And secondly, what we're going to do together to make it even better. So I'm an advocate of creating those conversations across an organization where you bring people together to find out ways to do things better and differently and more effectively. And I think it's the power of that community that you can reflect on from each of those generational groups and understand their individual needs by listening more, but also by acting on the issues that are facing those individual demographic groups. And that's what we're here to talk about today. You know, by
Lucy, Lisa,
there'll be 1 million more over 50 people in the UK. 300,000 fewer people in the UK will be at work. So we've got a demographic issue to solve in terms of skills shortages and capabilities. So it's up to us as organisations to deal with that, to deliver a better outcome for us as organisations and also the wider community and our stakeholders. And the OECD, which consists of 38 countries around the world, at 2020 reported that investing in multi-general workforces will raise GDP capital by at least 19% in the next 3 decades. So it's not just about doing the right thing to create those communities. It's also about the economic value of leveraging all of those demographic groups to work together to create a better society for everyone.
Lisa, Lucy, anything to add on that?
Yeah, I would just say, 80% of the UK's wealth is held by people over the age of 50. So if you're not targeting them as your customers, seems a little bit crazy not to. And the best way to target them as your customers is to have them in your workforce. And even if you don't really think you want to think about this or deal with it, I guarantee every single person will get older. So even if you don't want to do it for other people, do it for yourself or do it for your future self. And it's coming faster than you think, 2040. So it's not that far away. 50% of the entire workforce will be over 50. So get your head around it now.
Yeah, I think I remember we were talking before off air, and you were talking about, you gave me an example of an organization. I don't think we're going to name names, but you were saying that they were a tech company, but their target customer was very much the over 50s. And you talked about how when you looked at their workforce, most of the people in the workforce were in their 20s or in their early 30s.
I'll call them out. It was a care company.
Yeah.
It's called Lottie. I've given them plenty of
Okay.
opportunity to respond.
Yeah.
But yeah, you're selling to people like me with parents in care homes. You know, it makes sense to have people who can relate to the issues of parents dying and who've given birth and understand the struggle of looking after young children and elderly parents at the same time. It's not even about a commercial thing, it's about an empathy thing. It just seems crazy to me that pretty much 100% of your workforce doesn't represent anyone in your customer base.
Yeah. Lisa, on the opportunities of the age range, anything that you wanted to add on from what Michael and Lucy have been saying?
Yeah, well, again, it's just one of the points that Michael had said. Again, it's that collaboration of the different way of working, the different ways of thinking, and it's combining that as one entity. Because, you know, we already know that different age groups think differently, communicate differently, expect things differently. You know, people over 50 like me, we are loyal to our employers and we will stay a long time, whereas the, you know, younger generation don't. They have portfolio careers. It's a very different look and feel now. And you know, take Lucy's point of, we have to understand that. We need to stop looking at things like, you know, somebody's CV because they've job jumped. You know, previously that would be a bad thing, whereas now you're seeing more and more of it. But that means that people will stay, they will add value, and they will move. And movement brings strength to the economy. It brings them lots of different learning opportunities, which they can take from A to B to C. And there's, do you know what I mean? So moving around and being fluid, I think, is a very positive thing now. Whereas I know that there's still a lot of companies that have got to catch up with that mindset of moving forward, rather than, well, that's not comfortable for us, or we're not used to doing that. That's how it's always been. And so, let's say, so that movement and the injection of energy, different ways of thinking, as well as that factor on the experience and the wisdom that you only get with age. You know, if I look at my 20 self, I wouldn't have been as challenging as I am now, because you get, you know, you grow in your own skin and you get used to, and you get a confidence, etc., etc. But that all brings, you know, lots of advantages for a business, and it's about, you know, kind of calibrating that together. And giving back, you know, when you get to a certain particular age, you think, okay, I've learned a lot, and now the opportunity to mentor and give back and help nurture and educate the next generation coming through is a privilege to do that. Which again comes back to the culture, which, you know, adds a lot of value of why you would want to work in any company.
That's really interesting, Lisa, because obviously I'm on the front line of recruitment, right? And I'm mostly dealing with, should we say, Gen X's to recruit, well, sometimes Gen Ys or millennials or whatever else. But it's interesting, you have some leaders that will, you know, look at a CV and see the movement and just instant no. You know, sometimes for me, it's difficult as a when you're thinking about career planning, because that is changing. There are a lot of skills you can gain by having a bit more movement. You're going into different industries, going into different roles, learning off different people. And it's not necessarily a bad thing to go and do that. But in obviously many of the customers that I have don't like that. You know, we tend to look for, you know, for stability in CVs, and certainly we like things like internal promotions rather than movement for promotion, if that makes sense. So it's interesting how, you know, the expectations, certainly from a recruitment perspective, and what you talked about, and that's, you know, that's obviously going to change, and that's part of the challenge, obviously, to come in. Lucy, were you going to add something? I saw you come off
Yeah.
mute, so I was like, Lucy wants to say something now.
I do, yeah. It's interesting that you're saying organisations would rather have their employees move around internally, because it's pretty rare I see them facilitating that. You know, a lot of the time, actually, if anything, it's more a case of, well, I don't get rewarded if somebody in my team moves to go into another team, so I'm certainly not going to facilitate that. And I very rarely see organisations, other than maybe in the hotel sector, but it's pretty rare for me to see someone that goes, yes, well, we really want people to move into experience different things, go and rotate around different departments. I think they do it in the civil service a bit, but on the whole, I think the mechanisms that people need to actually encourage internal mobility don't exist.
Yeah, and I think you're right to an extent, but the I suppose from a discipline perspective, so within a profession, so rather than moving around into different complete disciplines, but actually, like for example in HR, moving into maybe into a more specialist role and then going back into a generalist role.
But again, what you find is, you find from Lucy's point is a lot of companies would rather hire externally in, because they see somebody as ready-made, rather than I'm going to, succession plan and develop somebody that may take a year or 18 months. I see that a lot, especially in HR.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly. And I think there's an opportunity to create a conversation where you're looking at understanding the individual's needs and trying to address that through career pathways, which, our career pathways, mine, hasn't been completely linear, and life isn't linear. So it shouldn't be the same in organizations too, that you've got a straight line for people to go from that level up to that level in a straight line. For me, it's about what's best for the individual that will fit the organization's needs, and can we support them to develop towards that goal. And you do that through succession planning, you do that through career pathway development. But it's also about listening to the individual and not making assumptions about what that individual is looking for in their career path at whatever time in their career journey they are.
We will, during this show, probably talk a little bit more about those sort of in the over 50 age bracket and those Gen Zers that are sort of starting to come into the workforce. Some of them already in, but going to make up more and more of the workforce going forwards, mostly because they're at either end, so they're most likely to be a victim of ageism potentially, and we'll discuss that again shortly at some point in the show, but also because they perhaps represent the greatest opportunity and therefore possibly the greatest challenge. So it's not that we're ignoring Gen X's or Gen Y's, but it's just that they make up most of the workforce at the moment, and that they are in the workforce and part of that. So just as a caveat, if anyone's thinking, why are they only talking about older people, or why are they only talking about young people, it's because they represent that sort of opportunity. Which brings me quite nicely to Tushar. Thank you for joining us. He's asked a question. I'll just bring it up on screen. So what does the panel think about supporting over 50s during their careers? A great deal of emphasis is placed on creating an environment that accommodates learning and career development for the younger population, but I don't see much being done for the older workforce. I may feel cast aside for promotion or development. Obviously, there was something very recently, certainly in the UK, the budget, there was this new sort of apprenticeship scheme, obviously aimed at older workers. But Lucy, I'm going to throw this question at you, because I think this makes a lot more sense. It's your kind of area and kind of your expertise, really. So we'll start with you, and then maybe Michael and Lisa will have something to add. So what do you think about supporting over 50s and careers? And do you think there's a lack? Do you think the changes in the budget will make a difference?
Okay, so I'll start with Tushar's question. There isn't, is there anything out there to support people in their 50s? The answer to that is very little. As far as I know, your main option is go to a career coach, which can be expensive. It's an unregulated industry. If you're lucky, maybe you work for an employer that does invest in your development, but anyone over the age of 50 is the least invested in demographic group across the board for any organisation. So Tushar, you're absolutely right. That's the gap in the market that we're filling. So £30 a year, people. That's my pitch. And I have to say, we're doing a bloody good job, if I do say so myself. And actually, because we are pretty much the only supplier in the market in terms of that kind of career development support, I would say that is why we were invited to give evidence at the select committee. So you're asking me about Jeremy Hunt and what's happening. Well, I can tell you, I've spent most of last week going backwards and forwards, outlining the plans for what I think would work. I cannot tell you whether or not government will adopt them, but what I've advised them is For returnships, I don't even think they should call them returnships. They need to call them career changerships, because returnships is confusing. But for career changerships to work versus apprenticeships, they need to be very flexible. People have got needs around flexibility and caring and so on. They need to be reduced in length versus apprenticeships, so not as many hours dedicated each week to studying. Ideally, I mean, all of this stuff about encouraging people to have more pension money to spend and invest is not the right target at all. You don't need to encourage people who are already quite wealthy to carry on working. Actually, what you need to do is encourage companies to create the conditions that allow that to happen. So if every company was to have reduced national insurance contributions for everyone over the age of 50, that would encourage them commercially to start being a lot more strategic about the over 50s workforce. I'd love to see that happen. I'm not going to say it is going to happen. Guaranteed job at the end, opportunities to shadow so people can self-select. You know, there isn't a lack of training opportunities out there. There is a real lack of people knowing what it is they want to do next. So again, our survey, more than 6,000 people over the age of 50, specifically over the age of 50, all want to work, all want to do something. They want to do something that gives them purpose. They've got no idea what they want to do. 30, 20 years in a job tells you what you no longer want to do. 250 FTSE companies have all got graduate schemes. I can think of one, Aldi, that actually have a career changer scheme. I mean, how ridiculous is that? So yeah, I'm going to say, when you say that, you know, there's not an awful lot of opportunity out there for the younger Gen Zers or whatever. There is. Yeah, you've got apprenticeships, you've got grad schemes, you've got everything. You've got school, nothing for the over 50s.
It's Tushar just put. I found this hilarious. So, if anybody saw, Jeremy Hunt commented in January that the over 50s ought to get off the golf course to help with the UK's labour shortage. And Tushar's just put, if you can't see this, I better not renew my golf membership just yet then. So yeah, I mean, it's certainly interesting. Lisa, did Michael, did you want to jump in and add anything?
Respectfully, I want to kind of throw something a little bit controversial in this. Insofar
as... Doesn't like you, Lisa.
Right? Let's be very real here. We haven't got a skills shortage because the over 50s have all taken up golf. Okay, so let's call it what it is. The government have made huge decisions. This is the back end of Brexit. We're now feeling the pain of lots of jobs and nobody to fill them in for very different reasons. That's just one example of. But making and stating a public claim that, you know, insinuating that when you're 50, you all take up golf, you all work part-time, you're all lazy, you all can't be bothered, you're all over the hill, hasn't helped. But it's that kind of like that general sweeping statement that if we get everybody back to work to over 50s, it's going to solve the problem. No, the problem is wider than this. So that was just me getting off my soapbox. I'll be quiet now.
Yeah, and I agree. I think it's also about creating the space for the conversation to be had and the action around what is it that this group is looking for. So Lucy's point around people don't really understand what they want to do next, and if they do, the pathway is less easy for them to travel as you're over 50 and above. So I think there's an opportunity for organizations to take the lead on this and start creating those pathways and opportunity for conversation about what's next for me, what's next for my role, what's next for the next phase of my career, whether it's a returning situation or it's an individual in the organization saying, well, I would like to offer some more of my prospective experience. So how do we go about doing that? In mentoring, in reverse mentoring, and opportunities for creating those communities that I mentioned. And it is around that proactive nature of, we've got the skills, we know where they are, what are we going to do with them to maximize our opportunity with our customers and the stakeholders and the external communities.
Yeah, we absolutely don't have a skills shortage. We have a how we think about people over the age of 50 shortage of leadership and thought leadership.
And also that, you know, we'll talk about sort of coming back to work, the over 50s that Lucy mentioned. You know, a lot of people are available for work. They're just not available for work for 40 hours a week. Okay, so if you look at most, and I say most job boards now, all of the roles are all advertised as full-time. And the question is, well, does it need to be full-time? Could it be job share? It's one of those things that used to work very, very well. Now, all of a sudden, it's just fell off. You very rarely see it because somebody thinks that they have to put a little bit more effort of kind of tying the two together. So again, it's about changing the mindset of just because somebody's left the organization, you automatically go to, well, we'll fill that role as a full-time permanent role again. And it's like, well, is that the right thing to do? We've got the ability to actually rethink how we do this. Could it be a part-time? Could it be 30 hours? Could it be two lots of 25? But we're not thinking in that way. We're just thinking and doing what's most comfortable, that's right in front of us, rather than actually building out the future of work.
That's probably the same for most generations and most age groups as well. I mean, we employ somebody on an 18-hour, very flexible basis with us. Well, some full-timers, but like, you know, we have that sort of flexibility, and they're not over 50. So, you know, there's other reasons why people might want that flexibility in terms of attracting that sort of talent. I want to flip the conversation slightly. I'm going to stick with the idea of the over 50s. So obviously in the UK, we have a law, by law, people are protected against. So the Equality Act of 2010 includes provisions that ban age discrimination in the UK. I'm not sure about other countries in terms of whether there's any legislation around this sort of stuff. Possibly less, possibly some will have. But my thoughts are that the World Health Organization reported that 1 in 2 people are discriminated against because of their age, particularly the older people. So what I wanted to understand is whether you feel that it's not necessarily just the supply options, but whether there is an inherent issue around ageism, particularly towards the over 50s within organizations and businesses in the workplace at this stage. I'm just really keen to get your views on it, whether it's not necessarily that they really are wanting to particularly attract people of an older age into the workforce. I don't know who would like to go first on that one.
I think there's perception of flexibility and perception of contribution and energy that you see in job adverts, and the general conversation out there about what we've talked about with the over 50s population. And I think it is about changing the narrative in the organisation about what are the skills that we need, how do we support that in terms of development, what are we going to do to create a conversation and community around sharing knowledge and best practice and knowledge transfer. And I think there is a perception that those bandings that we've talked about of Generation X or baby boomers have been marketed in a particular way, which then creates momentum in our organisation that that's what we're going to talk about and how we refer to those particular groups in our organisation. So the narrative needs to change in terms of how we're using those skills and the value of the skills and perspectives and backgrounds and behaviours that we're needing to deliver what we need to.
Yeah, I don't. So this is an interesting one, right? I don't actually think people are particularly ageist. I just think they use processes and systems, and just status quo bias means laziness becomes the outcome and results in ageism. But I mean, on the whole, I'm 50 next year. A lot of people in our community, when they start talking to people are like, oh, they'd be absolutely brilliant for the job. However, when you see the CV on paper, they would have been rejected. You give people the right context and the right circumstances, people are suddenly not ageist. Yeah. So, you know, in psychology, we're always taught, it's so often it's not necessary. The biggest predictor of behavior is always context. And I think here we work with systems and processes and accepted rules of being that are ageist and have always followed a particular path. I don't actually believe that people themselves are inherently bad or genuinely screening people out because they're too old. I just think it's ignorance. It's not having the chance to get to know people properly or seeing them in a light that allows people to put themselves in their best foot forward.
Yeah, I think again the bias comes from perception, which is incorrect, that, you know, when you're 50 plus, like me, you aren't as energetic, you know, you're not prepared to do as much, you're not going to work as hard, you don't want to work the longer hours, you're not as committed, you're not as devoted to the company. And also, you know, yes, we have policies and processes in place, and you know, we can educate and, you know, understand about bias and how to overcome that as, you know, positive things to kind of overcome that. But again, it comes back to that original mindset of it. I always say that, you know, the fish rots from the head. And if you have any company, it starts with the culture, and the culture starts at the top. So if you've got somebody of that mindset, then of course, by default, it's going to go and drip feed, cascade down to every other part of the business. And so that's, if you've got somebody who has that opinion, then a massive part of the way that we use language and the linguistics that we use through every written communication that we have in the business is threaded with bias. And I think that's where a lot of it comes from.
I agree.
Well,
Listen,
I can
for
save
us,
organisations a lot of money here, though, and say right from the outset, please invest in changing your systems and processes. And exactly as Lisa was saying, more flexible working and thinking, can this job be 30 hours and 40 hours? Don't invest a lot of money in things like age unconscious bias training, because systematic reviews have shown time and time again it makes absolutely no difference. It's a waste of money. Save your money and think more impressively.
Yeah, and it's looking at how we operate as an organisation, to the language that we use from our marketing materials and how we reach our customers, and also looking at the employee groups as our customers. Because they've got a choice, haven't they? They've got a choice to stay or to go based on how they're treated.
I want to move away from our older workers and our older members of the workforce and go right to the end and talk about Gen Zers. I watched a podcast with Simon Sinek. He was talking about Gen Zers and some of the issues. And I was sat there, I was thinking, I'm not sure, these sort of aspects in there. But Lisa, obviously, part of the reason that we discussed this and why I was keen to get you on the show was that I know that you've done some research and wrote a paper around basically young people going into the workforce. I wonder if you could share some of the sort of findings that you had in terms of your research, just some of the, I suppose, the context around what young people are thinking when it comes to work and their careers and everything else. So a bit of a broad brush, so to speak, but could you let us know some of the things that you found?
Yeah, it was really quite interesting because, like you, I've read the kind of final chapter that Simon Sinek wrote in his book. And yes, again, there's lots of assumptions being made with the younger generation. But some of my findings were quite astounding insofar as one of the biggest things that came out, and I had thousands of hours of conversations with people to really get into the belly of it. And one of the things that one of the ladies had spoken to me about, and it's one of those things that's never left me, it was that kind of really resonated and kind of just dropped a whole moment, was that she said, we have seen firsthand what the world of work has done to our generations, to my elder brothers and sisters, to my mum and dad, to my gran and granddads. What loyalty, they've turned up and they've given loyalty, they've given their life, they have given their all to a company, but the company hasn't reciprocated that loyalty in the same effort. It hasn't been an equal transaction. And for that basis was the reason she said, so we don't want that. We don't want to go through the old school of learning because it doesn't fit. We are digitally enabled and the tutors are analog. And again, it was that really great analogy that she put forward. She said, so how we learn is different. We don't want to go and do 8 hours of talk and chalk. It's not what motivates us. We want micro learning. We want advancement in technology. We want to use all the technology to its best capacity because it's all we know. You see the kids now, little 3-year-olds that could use the iPad better than all of us put together on this call. They know every gadget available. But so it was about using the technology. Yes, they understand that they communicate differently and no, they would rather not get on the phone and have a conversation. It's all text speak and digitally sort of enabled that way. But again, it was that awareness of just because that's what you used to do, what companies aren't used to doing is doing it our way. And a great example of that was a handbook that was written saying you have to physically call in to your manager to say that you're off ill. And they were like, well, I text in, and they get into so much bother. And I see this in HR all the time. Well, they haven't followed the process. And it's like, yes, but the process is no longer fit for purpose. Does it matter how somebody communicates? As long as you know that 1, they won't be turning into work, and 2, they're okay. And do they need any help or support? So it hasn't negated any of the welfare, the care, and workforce planning. It's just moved on into a different generation. So the findings were, again, that loyalty. So they don't expect to be in a business for longer than 5 years. They don't want to go to the office every day. And obviously COVID has had a massive impact. And some of this research was done pre-COVID. So that's had a massive impact about how people, where people work, and they can work and be fluid. They can work anywhere. And we now have systems that support that, whereas that didn't happen before. But again, so it's just that it's a completely different look and feel of what's the expectation. So we hear things that the younger people are uneducated, and it's like, well, we don't feel that we have to go and get certificates and 15 letters after our name anymore. We can learn something off the internet just as much as we can by going through, do a degree. Why do we have to have a degree? And they're starting to ask these questions. And again, education is, again, very expensive, and it's not available to all. And they have this social injustice side where they go, well, that can't be right. So, and again, more sort of focused on sustainability and the core values that really, resonate with them is what they're expecting. And so their communities that they build around each other are very different, because their motivations are slightly different from the older generation. And it was just mind-blowing. Some of the stuff that came out was incredible. It really kind of made me think in a lot of ways of HR, how are we doing it now? And we talk about things like the world of work, but actually we're still far behind. We are still yards behind of where we could be, should be, which again is I see more respect from the young ones for the older generation than the other way around. But that kind of entitlement of, okay, I want everything now. Well, of course, they've been born into a world where they can have everything now. You click on an app, you can buy your food in an hour and have it delivered. You can buy your shopping, you can buy anything for your house, you can buy a holiday, you can book yourself on a flight and be on one in 35 minutes. We have got the world of technology means that we can have everything now. So when people say, well, that a generation of entitled, spoiled little brats, which I've heard firsthand, which has come from, and it's like, well, actually, no, they're not. You just don't understand why they're not, but they're not. They are acting and behaving in a way, in the parameters that is there for them, and they use it, and that's the way things are now. So it's not right, it's not wrong, it's just different than some generations have got used to. But there's a lot of learning to be done from that. So yeah, and I'm happy if anybody wants a copy, or Leon, I'm happy to kind of brush up the paper sent over and send it to anybody for a read if they think that will be of any value. But yeah, it was really insightful, really, really great to do.
Yeah, thank you. And obviously, you sent me the paper before, so I had a good read, and very interesting. I mean, when you hear quite a lot about concerns from businesses and organisations about engaging young people and then retaining them, and there's all sorts of evidence. As I was doing my research, that they'll move much more quickly. They're not bothered about, obviously, sort of staying in an organisation if it's not quite right, if it doesn't fit their morals. Whereas, sort of, I don't know, going back sort of 30, 40 years, perhaps, people in those situations didn't have the opportunities available so much. So people did stay, and if they didn't agree with their boss, well, they just had to make do with it. And there was probably, there wasn't that sort of sense of sort of empowerment, I suppose, in sort of previous generations, which sometimes I wonder whether that creates a bit of a disconnect, really, between that. And we'll come on to that in a bit. I just wanted to, there's a point that came through from Maya Bose. Thanks for joining us, Maya. I really like this. So she said, there's quite a bit in here, but the bit that was very interesting was she said only 30% of all employers are motivated to hire in the age category of over 55. So it's almost, so I think people avoid hiring someone much older than they are because they don't know how to manage them. How can we change this? And I do you know what, I see that sometimes as well. I've had that where people have said, "Oh, they're not sure, they're older than me, and if they were reporting into me, how would that be?" and things like that. I mean, I don't know if anybody wants to have a quick comment on that particular point that Maya brought to attention.
I think this is about the individualized expectations of employees to employers, much more so now than it has been before, post-COVID. And I think that personalized relationship that people expect from their employer needs to be developed and at least understood better and listened to more. Talking about flexible benefits and flexible ways of working and new opportunities for people to grow and develop, I think the answer has to be you need to consider what that individual needs are much more than previously. So the sheep dip approach of here's the benefits package and this is what we do as an organization with this group of employees no longer applies. It's about what is relevant for that individual. And I think the enlightened employers who are dealing with it that in that way are the ones that are going to win in the war of talent and find people that are interested to stay and interested to grow and stick around.
Again, in answer to the previous question about as you get older, you become more confident in yourself. You know, you're comfortable in your own skin, and you have, you know, you're empowered to sort of call it out. Whereas when you're younger, you tend not to do that, and of course that perpetuates that. We'll have somebody who's younger because they'll be more compliant, or they'll be less kind of, you know, confrontational, and again that comes from bias and a misunderstanding and miscommunication. But I do take the point from the previous comment that it does happen, and I think that's, you know, some of the reasons why.
And I'm going to say hello. By the way, Maya is setting up this amazing, cool company where she's doing internships and like work experience for people in charities, which is really cool because it's a sector that a lot of people want to explore or think about going into, particularly as they get a bit older. Cool. But I would say in response to this one, she's absolutely right. There's about a 39% swing. Yeah, most recruiters tend to be quite young, no offense, but it's not exactly the highest barrier to entry. So there's a lot of people in recruitment who tend to be quite young, more than there are in their 50s or 60s. So there's a large amount of rejection that goes on. It does happen. We advise all of the people that go through our programs, just don't even bother with jobs boards because it's basically a waste of your time. But what we do is then we work on skilling up the individual to tackle it themselves, because manager's not going to bring it up, right? The minute they start saying, oh, by the way, I'm a bit concerned about the fact you're older than me, that's potentially age discriminating, right? So they're not going to bring it up. So there's the elephant in the room. It has got to get talked about. Yeah. And the person who's most empowered to do it is the person who's affected by it. So the only way to tackle it is to work with individuals and basically to get them to appreciate how their age is frankly just bloody awesome. And give them the tool to actually manage those conversations, because, like I say, they're the ones affected by it.
I'm going to move on to a slightly different topic on the in terms of the generational aspect, because there are obviously great things about understanding. Okay, well, you know, what do young people really want, and can we get a common thread to that? But when we're talking about ageism. I asked a question, actually. I did a poll on LinkedIn, which I like to do these things just to get a bit of an idea about where people are at. And I'll bring it up on screen, actually, so people can see. For those that can't see, I'll read it out. So I asked on LinkedIn, are demographic groups, e.g. baby boomers, millennial, Gen Z, etc., useful for HR, or do they inadvertently fuel ageism? And 34% of people said that yes, it's helpful, and 66% said stop, it's fueling ageism. I just really wanted to get the panel's views on this, because we've talked about these generations in this show, and trying to get an idea about some of the common threads and synergies. So I just really wanted to get your take on that. So again, do you think that these are good things to do, or do you think they fuel ageism? Lucy, I'm going to come to you first. That's okay. I'd like to get a comment from all of you, if that's okay.
I don't have a problem with it at all. You know, we say male, female, we say socioeconomic groups, A, D, whoever it is that you're targeting. You know, if it helps you to categorize things, there are different needs of different groups. Somebody who's unemployed has got different needs from someone who's very, very wealthy. You have to have a label on it. You could just put maybe the age ranges instead of titling them. Maybe the name boomer is the only thing that makes it negative is tone of voice and how people perceive it. You know, it isn't a problem to say, what country did you come from? It's a problem to say, what country did you come from? Ooh, I hate people from that country, and people who come from that country are stupid. All right, asking a question isn't a problem. It's the other stuff that goes around it.
Yeah, I think you can attach labels and deal with the labels, but actually it's what you do with those groups and how you're going to support the conversation about what their needs are in comparison to other groups in your organization, and do something about it. So the labeling groups of people in those demographics, well, do you know what? It's always been done and it always will be done. But it's what you do with making sure that you can address their individual needs as populations and bring it into a conversation and action to include them where necessary.
Yeah.
So you both would say, yes, it's a good thing, a useful thing for HR.
I'd say it's always a good thing to understand the needs of different groups. Yeah.
Okay. Lisa?
Yeah, it's one of those that I don't always sit on the fence with anything, but this one I can genuinely see both sides, because, you know, understanding the data is important, and then to make sure that you are doing everything to be as inclusive as possible, because you have the data to prove that you're not. It shows you where you're going wrong. But the same way is labels equal bias, and entrenches it even more. And so then you've got a bigger problem than it needs to have. So having the data is helpful and supportive. The actual kind of labeling, how it's labeled, I think is where it needs to be readdressed.
It's interesting, and on the actual LinkedIn post that I did, I think it was Barry Flack, who I know, who was particularly not in favour, and thinking we should just get rid of them, and anything that has generation in there is just it's not a useful thing. Grouping people together in terms of that. And I remember, Lucy, when you and I spoke, I don't know, it was probably about a month ago or something like that, and we talked, and I sort of asked you this question because I was just intrigued. And I think you said it's not necessarily about behaviours, but it's also sometimes about the context. So understanding the context of somebody over 50 or the context of somebody who's entering the workforce is different. So if you're in your, say, early 20s, you might be trying to get to the point of buying a house, or the most important thing might be getting the cocktails on a Friday night, whereas potentially when you're, say, 55, that might not be important to you in terms of what you're doing. So yeah, it's interesting in terms of understanding it from sometimes the context rather than kind of like the assumed group behaviors. I think is quite intriguing. But I'm a bit like you, Lisa. I sit on the fence a little bit on that one, and I can do on here because it's my podcast and it's not a binary question like I asked on LinkedIn. And I do feel sorry because I put that on LinkedIn, and I think a lot of people might feel it can be useful, but we've got to be careful with it. There's no chance on LinkedIn to put a but. It's either a yes, you think it's useful, or no, you think it's fueling ageism. So I understand there's more nuance to it than that, and maybe some people didn't want to vote because they didn't feel they could really put that in there. So, but if you're in the chat and it'd be great to know your thoughts and comments on this. Even if it's not live, we can still see those comments and we'll still come up. So let us know what you think, whether you think it's a useful thing for us to have and for HR to be looking at, or whether you think it's actually a bit of a problematic thing and we should probably bin the whole concept altogether and really focus on individual needs and requirements. We are coming a bit later on into the terms of the show, but we have talked a little bit about some of the differences between, I think, Lisa, you talked about Gen Zers and their styles of communication. You talked about sickness, for example. One of the things that generally is kind of thrown at older workers is their desire to have face-to-face conversations and things like that. And I was just intrigued because, Michael, one of the things you talked about when we first talked about doing this show was how do you get knowledge transfer between, groups which may have different preferred communication styles, and then how do you, in terms of mentorship and things like that as well. So I suppose I'm just intrigued about what your advice might be if you're a HR director or HR practitioner in your organization at the moment and thinking, well, how do we best sort of engage the different aspects and get that knowledge transfer between different age groups, the broad age range in the business. What advice would you give?
Well, there's a number of things to consider. I think the data point that Lisa's mentioned and we talked about so far in this conversation is we know with the data where the demographic groups exist in our organization. So finding a way to create conversations with getting those different groups of people together and actively doing that to listen to their needs as a population sharing knowledge to help with creating new communities or project groups or perspectives. But it's not just about talking, it's also about doing. So taking the themes that comes from those conversations and creating new ways of working or different ways of working, or sharing knowledge and transferring information between those demographic groups. And what I've done in other organizations that's been really successful is ask the question, would you refer us as a good employer? If not, why not? And it creates a brilliant conversation about what you're doing well and not well. And they have different groups of people in those discussion groups, and taking the themes from those conversations and dealing with it as priorities, and then communicating and using that closed loop conversation around what the improvements we need to make as an organization and doing something about it. I like the other policies that we can review is, from an HR perspective, is recruitment processes. Are we using the right language to attract people into the organization from all the demographic groups that we know are out there? And also creating new skills and asking people what they're looking for in their career pathway. That career pathway could be, at this point in their career, what do we need to do to support you to grow and develop? And is that linear? And as I've said, it's zigzag. But understanding those individual needs is really important, much more so than it was before. And I guess it's the offering training and development to support what that individual is looking for to go next in the organization to keep them. It's about retention of skills as well as transfer of knowledge.
Lisa?
If I can give a practical, if I just give a practical example of, if we just very blunt language, old versus new, old meets new, is apprenticeship scheme. We developed apprenticeship scheme, which how we blended it was, we understood the 16, 17, 18-year-olds weren't particularly focused on the college side, but very, very good at engineering. So what we decided to do is to speak their language, and we said, well, we'll gamify it. And we started off with what was a huge, big magnetic kind of Monopoly board concept. So one, it was visual, so it was inclusive for a number of people. Two, it was gamified, so it was fun as they then got, progress and moved around the squares. But the content of the squares and what was behind the cards was actually designed by the experienced engineers. So we had the wisdom, the knowledge, the insights from the older generation, which was then designed into a younger generation's kind of view. And it was brilliant. And then we paid a very clever lad to go and make it into a bit of an app. But that's a great practical example of where you take something that's, developing your people, but having the insight from somebody who's experienced, delivered in a way that fits that generation. And I'm not saying you can do that with everything, but there's just but that conversation came from what you're saying, Michael, is how do you want to learn? How are you best learning? What's your learning style? What do we currently have in the business? Who can accommodate that? Well, we work this way, but you work that way. How can we bridge something in the middle that we can both live with? And then we just had some crazy time and a few beers and a few pork scratchings, and hey, it was born. And I've never seen anything like it out there at all since doing it. But that's just a practical example I wanted to kind of give the audience of, get creative, have some fun with it. And there are ways that you can blend the two together, which delivers for the business, but you've included both or three different types of generations that deliver something. And then that mentorship comes as an added bonus because they've been involved in the process of building something that made sense.
Yeah, and by the way, it's not just about knowledge transfer from older to younger workers. It's also about younger workers to older workers and remote mentoring or reverse mentoring, and voice of the workforce initiatives. We are actually listening and learning from each other.
Yeah,
it's interesting. I was so from an L&D perspective, I think L&D at the moment has gone through quite a significant change in terms of the way that it operates and going to these sort of learning platforms, which are more like social kind of networks as well, and you've got more access to people all across the business, and some really great examples that I've seen. I've also seen with businesses where they've used things like virtual reality, and experiential learning is supposedly much better than sitting in a classroom and being taught by somebody from that perspective. And I've also seen, I was working with it was a really quite a junior L&D person, but he developed a really interesting app to really look at management development. And I was like, well, why did you do it this way? And I was like, well, because, that most of our managers, they're normally between sort of 30 to 40. And I was like, okay, so why have you done it like this then? And he said, well, you'd be surprised that a lot of 30 to 40-year-olds still like doing these things, and will probably learn more by going through this experiential. And it was like, there was all this thing about you go into an environment and then you can choose what you go and do. And then you go through these different bits and everything else. And I thought that was really interesting, because he was only, I think, probably in his mid-20s, but he developed this app that was aimed at management who are older than him. So when you talk about the reverse side of things, Michael, I've seen that in practice, and I thought it was great. He showed me this thing that he did, and I thought it was absolutely fantastic. So particularly in the space of L&D, I think you're seeing quite a lot of development and using technology that I think will really make a difference for for everyone across this sort of broad sort of age bracket, really. I've just seen the time. We are coming up to actually our hour, so that's gone really fast. So I think what we'll do is we'll wrap up there in terms of the actual discussion. We've obviously still got to do our 2 lies, 1 truth. So I'd certainly be really keen to do that. So is there anything anybody wants to add? Does anybody feel like we've cut too short, or there's something, a really burning thing they wanted to say before we do move on and wrap up the show?
I hope it's been useful.
Sorry?
I hope it's been useful for people, because I think it's been a great conversation. Thank you.
Yeah, no, certainly. There's some really interesting stuff that's come out of it, and yeah, certainly. If thank you for joining. So let's go to 2 lies, 1 truth. So I think we went in order. So Michael, will you remind everyone of your 3 facts?
3 facts were: I'm very good at hopping. I'm a world-class bagpipe player. I can't remember what the first one was, but anyway, you can tell me. I think the truth one.
Bad skier. Hang on, don't tell us yet. We're going to guess.
Oh, okay.
You said bad skier, world champion bagpipe player, and you were very good at hopping. Lucy, you know Michael best. Which do you think is the truth?
I know which one is the truth.
All right. Okay, all right. You're not allowed.
Easy.
Lisa, which one do you think is the truth?
As much as I want to say about the bagpipes, because they are not easy to play, but I do think you play them. I don't know if you're quite world leader in it though. So I'm going to go with the bagpipes.
I'm going to go with the skier, being a bad skier. I bet there's some story or something behind it.
So the truth is, I am a bagpipe player. I've been playing since I was 9 years old. We played in world championships and won when I was in the pipe band. So yes, I could class myself as a world champion bagpipe player.
Wow. Because you added that at the end, that threw me. That totally threw me. Because it's like, let's make
you
it
think
more.
You're good at this, Leon. Just saying. Not a psychologist yet.
Yeah, okay. Maybe not a career in poker just yet. Lucy, what were your 3 facts? Remind us.
All right, so mine is love reptiles. So I have a python as a pet. I have a Guinness World Record, and I grew up and spent 22 years in Kenya.
Michael, do you know the answer to this? Do we have to exclude?
I know one of them.
Well, that must be it. If you know one of them, that must be the truth. So, Michael, you're excluded. Lisa?
What was your Guinness World Record in?
Farthest amount of miles or kilometers traveled by human manpower alone in a 24-hour period.
Ooh. I'm going to go with you don't really have a snake.
No, she has a. Oh, right. Okay. So remember, it's 1 truth.
Oh, right. Sorry. Yes. Okay. So it's which one is true?
Yeah.
The 3rd one.
Growing up in Kenya.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. I'm going to go with the reptiles. You have a python.
Yeah. No, I actually have a Guinness World Record.
All right.
Yeah.
What are the things you were traveling in then? What's this?
Well, I actually spent 22 years in Hong Kong, so it wasn't quite Kenya. But I just see how I threw that. I kind of framed it. Different country.
Yeah.
Got you.
It's sort of like a half truth.
It's
That's a very sneaky way. Yeah. I've seen some guests do that in the past. Yeah, the sort of half truth. Yeah.
Yeah. It's still a complete lie, right? I actually
Yeah.
live in Kenya because it has got black mambas and snakes in it, and I can't stand snakes.
Oh, okay. Interesting. Lisa, remind us of your 3 facts.
Yeah, so mine was I speak 3 languages. I used to be a vet, and I live in an eco house. Which
I think I know which one this one is, but I'll go last. Michael, do you want to guess?
I think the truth is you live in an eco house.
Okay. Lucy?
I'm going to go with that one too.
I'm also going to go eco house. I think that might be the one. So yeah,
yes,
we're all going with the same. Are we right?
Yes. Yeah, I live in a wooden framed eco house.
And it just goes to show, Lisa, how honest you are. That we can all.
Yes, yeah. I don't do fibs.
No.
It's just not. I just can't do it.
Yeah, no, that was brilliant. Well, so I've just seen in the comment, Lisa, that Amy Herbertson would be quite keen to have a read of your research as well. So yeah, perhaps if you let me know if you want me to send it on or help or whatever else. But Amy, do get in touch, and we'll. I think Lisa says she's happy to share that with you. So
I'll probably just there's a little other bit I could add to it, Leon. So let me do that the rest of this week, and then I'll pass it to you, and you're more than welcome to hand it out to your network.
Whoever.
If it helps.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Well, that brings us to the end of the show. If you've watched on YouTube, please do subscribe or give us a thumb up. If you're on LinkedIn, please give us a thumb up because that also helps. If you're on Twitter and watching this, then please do the heart. I know you've not been able to get involved in the chat on that. And if you're listening to this on any of the podcast platforms, then you can subscribe, and there is lots of other shows on there. In fact, YouTube, we've got all kinds of stuff. So we've got hosting HR highlights. We have our HR book club. We're starting to do shorts as well. So there's lots of really interesting content going on there. So yeah, please do support us any way that you can. That'd be fantastic, particularly obviously if you enjoyed the show. And if you'd like a particular topic to be covered, let us know. We're always open to that. So yeah, do drop me a note or a message on any sort of platform you can find me on. But otherwise, I just want to say thank you for tuning in, and thank you, Michael, Lucy, and Lisa, for being such a wonderful panel today.
Oh, thank you, Leon. Thank you
for everyone. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Take care.